The forest was wrapped in a heavy mist, the kind that usually did so by accident or by force. Still, he hesitated, blanketed the world in silence and made even the trees seem to hold their breath. Dusk had already swallowed most of the light, leaving only streaks of ash-colored sky visible through the thick canopy overhead. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, and the air was tinged with damp earth, pine, and the faint scent of rain to come. Rowan moved carefully across the mossy ground, his boots soundless against the soil. In one hand, he carried a lantern that flickered with amber light, casting irregular shapes on the trees as he walked. It was a routine walk, checking his traps, collecting trail camera memory cards, keeping the forest in balance. For Rowan, the woods were not just a place to live. They were his sanctuary. But tonight felt different. He had just rounded a narrow bend near the ridge when he stopped cold. A sound, a thin, broken cry, rose up from somewhere deeper in the underbrush. Faint. Fragile. Human. He held his breath, listening. Silence. Then again, the cry, softer now, almost swallowed by the trees. It was neither loud nor long, but it didn't belong. It didn't match the rustling of a startled deer or the startled yip of a fox. It was wrong in the way that stirred something deep and ancient inside him. Rowan tensed, mind racing. Could it be an animal, a trick of the wind, or something far more dangerous? He had learned long ago that people who wandered into this part of the forest, this wasn't his fight. Not his world anymore. But his feet moved anyway. Off the trail, through low-hanging branches and the hush of wet leaves. The lantern's glow reached ahead like a cautious question, illuminating only a few feet at a time. Each step felt like a choice, like a descent into something he hadn't yet named. And then the cry came again, sharper this time, yet still barely more than a whisper. Rowan stopped. Some part of him knew this was no animal. Maya had never imagined that love could feel so lonely. At 26, she had been the kind of woman people described as quietly brilliant, never loud, never attention-seeking, but always the one who noticed everything. She was a schoolteacher by profession, a reader by habit, and an optimist by choice. When she met Armin, his charm had been disarming. He was warm in public, respectful with her parents, and attentive in all the ways that made a woman believe she was seen. They married within 6 months. The first few weeks in her new home were full of polite smiles and sweetened words from his family, his mother bringing her tea in the morning, his father asking about her work, his younger sister commenting on her cooking with gentle teasing. It felt close-knit and traditional, but not suffocating. Not at first. Then Maya got pregnant. It should have been a moment of celebration, something joyful to carry them into the next chapter. But instead, something subtle began to shift. Armin's expressions turned inward. He became distant, uninterested in her morning sickness, her checkups, her cravings. Conversations that once lingered over books and dreams became short, clipped, and cold. His silence was the first crack. Her in-laws followed suit in quieter ways. The warmth left their voices. Her routines were questioned, her independence gradually eroded. Her phone started disappearing from where she left it. At first, she assumed forgetfulness. Later, she realized it was being taken. Calls to her parents were discouraged. Rest, Maya, don't stress yourself, her mother-in-law would say, plucking the phone from her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Even visits from friends became infrequent, subtly blocked with excuses about Maya needing quiet or sleep. Her food was made for her without asking what she wanted. Sometimes it was food she disliked, sometimes dishes that made her nauseous. She was expected to eat it all the same. And Armin? He had begun to sleep in a separate room, citing work stress and not wanting to disturb her rest. But she knew better. He barely looked at her anymore. One day, she tried to voice her concerns, measured, carefully worded sentences about how she felt controlled, isolated, like a ghost in a house full of people. Armin didn't respond. He just stared at her, then muttered, "You always dramatize everything," before leaving the room. That night, she cried alone in the bathroom. Her growing belly felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just life, but dread. And yet, she kept trying. She told herself this was a phase. That maybe it was the stress of impending parenthood. That love, once frayed, could be mended. But the silence in the house deepened, until it became a presence of its own. Then came the unexpected announcement. It was a Thursday evening. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Maya sat curled on the couch, reading a worn copy of Jane Eyre, her only escape. The family was unusually gathered in the living room, sipping tea. Her mother-in-law was the one who smiled first. "We've decided something nice," she said, too sweetly. "A short trip. To the mountains." Maya looked up. "Mountains?" "Yes," Armin added, his tone unreadable. "A bit of fresh air will be good for you. And the baby." She blinked, confused. "But I have a doctor's appointment next week." "It can wait," his sister interrupted quickly. "You need rest more than anything." Maya forced a smile, her instincts prickling. Something felt off. Not in the words themselves, but in the timing. The sudden cheerfulness. The way their eyes didn't quite meet hers. She glanced at Armin, but he was already looking away. A trip. To the mountains. She should have felt excitement, even relief. Instead, all she felt was an ache at the base of her spine and a small, quiet voice inside her whispering, "Don't go." That night, long after the others had gone to bed, she stared out the window into the garden, arms wrapped protectively around her belly. The moon was hidden behind clouds, the air still. And for the first time since arriving in that house, Maya admitted to herself that she might be in danger. The sun rose pale and thin on the morning they were set to leave. Maya stood by the car, a small bag in her hand, stuffed with what she was told she'd need: sweater, scarf, her vitamin bottle, and a flask of warm water. Her mother-in-law insisted she didn't need anything more. "You won't be walking around much," she said, voice cheery as she placed a basket of snacks in the back seat. "It's a healing retreat. You'll be taken care of." The drive began like any other family outing, if a bit too quiet. Maya sat in the back, squeezed between her sister-in-law and a folded blanket. Armin drove, silent and staring ahead, while his parents exchanged idle comments about the weather and traffic. As the city dissolved behind them, so did Maya's sense of time. Trees grew denser. The road narrowed. Her phone had been taken for safekeeping, and there was no signal anyway. No one had told her where exactly they were going, only that the air up there is clean and that a spiritual guide helps women feel closer to their babies. It wasn't until they pulled off the main road and into a dirt path lined with wild grass that unease turned to dread. The forest around them was thick, dark green canopies woven together like a net over the trail. There were no signs, no cabins, no markers. Just wilderness. "We're stopping here?" Maya asked, her voice smaller than she expected. "Just a quick rest," Armin said without looking at her. They laid out a blanket and set down the basket. Her sister-in-law poured tea into paper cups. Her father-in-law hummed softly as if everything were entirely normal. The silence among the birds felt unnerving. The air was too still. Maya took a sip of the tea. It tasted faintly of something floral, but off like syrup that had gone stale. The trees around her began to blur at the edges. She blinked. Her limbs felt suddenly heavy. The voices around her became echoes. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick, her mouth dry. The last thing she saw was Armin standing and turning his back to her. When Maya woke, it was dusk. The blanket, the basket, and her family were gone. She sat up quickly, but the world spun. Her head throbbed, and her vision pulsed with light. All that remained was the flattened grass where they had been, and a single, overturned paper cup near her hand. "Armin," she croaked. "Amy." "Hello." Silence. She pushed herself up. The forest loomed tall around her, unfamiliar and vast. Panic roared through her body. She called out again, louder this time. "Hello? Anyone?" But the trees didn't answer. She turned in a slow circle, hoping for some path, a trace, a sign, but there was nothing. Her shoes were missing. Her scarf was gone. Even her bag had vanished. "They left me," she thought, breath-catching. "They really left me." Barefoot and dizzy, she stumbled through thick ferns and sharp twigs. Thorns tore at her legs. The roots beneath her were slick with moss. Her feet were bleeding within minutes. Still, she kept moving. A mother's instinct pushed her forward. But with every step, The forest pushed back. The sun vanished behind heavy clouds. Shadows crept in faster than she expected. Maya shouted again, this time not calling for them, but for anyone. Anyone. Her voice cracked and fell into nothing. Not even an echo returned. After what felt like hours, her legs gave out. She fell near a cluster of damp rocks, gasping for breath, vision swimming. Her hands shook. Her stomach cramped. The baby shifted inside her, a kick against her ribs that reminded her she wasn't just fighting for herself. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want to die out here. Tears streamed down her face. They burned worse than the cuts on her legs. The world tilted around her, trees spinning like carousel animals. She crawled forward, searching for water, for shelter, for hope. None came. Eventually, her thoughts began to twist. Faces flickered in the shadows. She saw her father, arms open. Her old cat brushing against her legs. Her school students waving from behind the branches. But none of it was real. She curled against a fallen log, shivering, one hand on her belly, the other clutching a leaf for no reason at all. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was not of fear but betrayal. Cut to. Armin sat at the head of the table, chewing on a piece of roast chicken. His mother poured tea. His sister laughed at something on her phone. No word, his father asked casually. Armin shrugged. She probably went back to her parents. She was unstable. Shame, his mother sighed, not looking up. She had such potential. They laughed together, clinking cups. Rowan Kane had not spoken to another human in over 6 months. His cabin sat nearly 2 miles off any navigable trail, swallowed by layers of forest few dared to explore. To some, he was a ghost story, the ex-military man who'd gone rogue, who hunted with his bare hands, who lived with wolves. The truth was far less dramatic. Rowan had come to the woods not to vanish, but to survive. After 20 years of service, half of them spent in conflict zones, Rowan had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. But it wasn't the battlefield that broke him. It was what happened back home. His younger sister, Lena, had called him 3 times in the span of a week. Each time, her voice had grown thinner, more desperate. He doesn't hit me where it shows, she'd whispered once. Rowan had offered to help, to take her away. But she said no. Said she was handling it. 2 weeks later, she was found in their apartment, bruised, broken, and gone. That was the last time Rowan had lived in a city. The forest became his penance, his sanctuary, and his escape. He built his cabin from scratch. Installed solar panels. Collected rainwater. Trained falcons. Studied wildlife patterns. He even built a grid of motion-activated cameras and sensors, partly to track animals, partly to maintain a perimeter. It was one of those cameras that changed everything. The footage came in just past midnight, fed wirelessly to a monitor inside his cabin. He hadn't expected movement, most creatures avoided that section of the woods. But the alert pinged anyway. He replayed the clip. At first, it was just leaves moving. Then, there. A shape stumbling between the trees. Human. Barefoot. Covered in mud. One hand on her stomach, the other dragging along a low-hanging branch for balance. She collapsed just before the edge of the frame. Rowan froze. A woman. Alone. Pregnant. The rational voice in his head, the one that had kept him alive through ambushes and ambivalence, told him to let it go. It wasn't his responsibility. He didn't owe the world anything anymore. Someone else would find her. But the look on her face, caught just briefly by the night vision lens, burned into his brain. She looked like Lena. Not physically. But in the eyes. There was the same blend of pain and disbelief. The same silent scream for help. Rowan stood up, jaw tightening. He moved to his gear rack, pulling down a canvas pack already prepped for emergencies. Inside were first aid supplies, protein bars, water, thermal blanket, knife, flare. Everything he might need. He slung his rifle across his back, more habit than intent. By dawn, he was already moving, silent as breath, eyes scanning, boots pressing gently into moss. He used the coordinates from the camera system to triangulate her last location. The trail was cold, but not impossible. Hours passed, but he didn't slow down. Not this time. Rowan found her by the stream, curled awkwardly against a moss-covered boulder, as if the forest had been trying to cradle her. Her lips were cracked, her skin pallid, and her bare feet caked in dried blood and forest soil. A few feet away, a torn piece of fabric fluttered from a low branch, perhaps part of her sleeve, snagged as she stumbled. One hand clutched her swollen belly protectively, the other lay limp in the mud. He knelt beside her without a word, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. A soft breath escaped her lips, raspy and strained, like the forest had been holding it for her. Rowan exhaled, tension slipping from his shoulders. He unstrapped the thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it gently around her. Then he secured her arms under her body and lifted her with practiced strength, mindful of her injuries and the child within her. She didn't wake. The journey back was long and deliberate. He avoided his usual paths, choosing flatter terrain to minimize jostling. Twice he had to stop and check her breathing. Each time, her chest rose just enough to reassure him. Back at the cabin, he laid her on the cot by the fireplace. He turned up the heat, filled a basin with warm water, and began the slow process of cleaning her wounds. She moaned slightly when he touched her ankle, sprained, swollen, likely twisted in a fall. He wrapped it tightly. Her hands had splinters and thorns lodged deep beneath the skin. He worked silently, removing them one by one. Rowan worked through the night. He placed a water bottle by the bed. Left a protein bar nearby in case she woke. He didn't hover. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, monitoring her breathing like a soldier watching the horizon. It wasn't until morning that she stirred. She awoke with a gasp, eyes wide and frantic. Her hand flew to her stomach. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Safe," Rowan said quickly, holding up both palms in the least threatening gesture he knew. "You're safe." She tried to sit, then recoiled, eyes darting around the room. Panic settled over her like a second skin. "Who are you?" she rasped. "A stranger," he said honestly. "But not your enemy." She didn't speak. She scanned the cabin, walls lined with books, bundles of dried herbs hanging from beams, a fireplace crackling softly. Her eyes landed on the open door. He followed her gaze and stood, walking over slowly to shut it. "I won't stop you," he said. "But it's freezing outside, and you won't make it another mile on that foot." She didn't move. Her breathing slowed, but her body remained rigid. Rowan stepped back, giving her space. The next few hours were quiet. She ate nothing. Drank a little. Watched him carefully as he moved about the cabin. He stayed on his side of the room. Said little. Every time she twitched at a sound, he paused to show her she was still in control. By nightfall, she was asleep again, fitful, but healing. The days that followed were a study in patience. Rowan continued tending to her injuries without fanfare. He left a small stack of clothes by the bed. Lit the lantern before dusk. Brewed herbal tea and placed it beside her silently. He never entered her space uninvited, never hovered too close. On the third day, she sat up and asked, "Is this really your home?" He nodded. "Been here almost 4 years. No one else. No one else." Her gaze dropped to her belly. "You live out here, completely alone?" He nodded again. "By choice." She was quiet for a while. Then, in a whisper so soft it almost disappeared into the walls, she said, "They left me there. I was supposed to die." Rowan didn't react. Didn't ask who. Didn't ask why. He simply replied, "But you didn't." Her lip quivered, but she nodded. In the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them, an invisible agreement not to force the truth. She wasn't ready to relive it, and he wasn't going to pull it from her. The next day, she ate the protein bar without prompting. On the 5th day, she asked for a mirror. Rowan handed her a small, cracked one from the drawer. She looked at herself and flinched, then slowly, purposefully, began to clean her face with a wet cloth. By the 6th day, she asked for his name. "Rowan," he said. She hesitated, then replied, "Maya." He gave her the ghost of a smile. "Good to meet you, Maya." That night, as she slept more peacefully than she had in days, Rowan sat on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. He didn't need her story. He just needed her to heal. By the end of the second week, Maya could walk from the bed to the front porch without Rowan's help. Her ankle was still tender, but the swelling had gone down, and the color was returning to her cheeks. She was eating small meals, sleeping deeper, and even laughing, just once, quietly, at a story Rowan told about a raccoon that had stolen his entire breakfast one morning and then returned to mock him from a branch. The forest no longer felt like a trap. It had become a place of slow healing, where silence wasn't threatening, and time didn't demand anything from her. Rowan noticed the change. So one morning, after breakfast, he brought out a small, well-worn backpack and placed it gently on the table. Inside were a flint, some cord, a folding knife, a compass, and a packet of dried herbs. "What's this?" Maya asked. "Survival starter kit," he replied. "Time to learn how to make this place yours, not your prison." Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." And so began her training. Rowan started with small tasks: how to strike a spark with the flint and steel, how to use pine sap to help the fire catch. He taught her to identify edible berries and how to filter water with charcoal, sand, and cloth. At first, her hands trembled with uncertainty, but day by day, her grip grew stronger. There was one day, however, when she accidentally cut herself while whittling a branch for kindling. The blood startled her, and she dropped the knife, backing away like she'd done something shameful. Rowan didn't panic. He washed the cut and bandaged it carefully. "You're allowed to mess up," he said. "That's part of the deal out here." She nodded slowly, the words sinking in. That night, she sat by the fire, holding her belly. The baby kicked gently, a small tap beneath her ribs, and tears welled in her eyes, soft, unexpected ones. Rowan, sensing something, said nothing. He handed her a mug of tea and let her speak when she was ready. "How do I bring a child into a world like this?" she whispered, staring at the flames. Rowan leaned back in his chair. The firelight flickered across his weathered face. "I used to ask myself the opposite," he said. "Why wasn't I enough to protect my sister from the world?" Maya looked at him, surprised. "I had just come back from overseas. I knew how to navigate war zones, rescue hostages, read terrain like the back of my hand, but I didn't know she was dying inside her own home." He stared into the fire, his voice tight. "I missed the signs. I believed her when she said she was fine. And when she finally called for help, I was too late." Silence fell between them. "You couldn't have known," Maya offered quietly. "I should have," Rowan replied. "I trained to notice the smallest threats. I was taught to track anything. But I couldn't track her fear until it swallowed her whole." Maya swallowed hard. "That's not your fault." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, slow, almost reluctant. "I stayed out here to disappear," he said. "But maybe I was supposed to be here for you." Her fingers tightened around her mug. "You survived the worst," he said, his voice steady now. "That's how you know you're ready." She blinked. "Ready for what?" "To raise someone who won't tolerate fear the way we had to. Someone strong. Someone free." Maya inhaled sharply. The idea that her suffering might someday mean strength for her child was overwhelming, but healing too. Over the next few days, their routine settled into something meaningful. She started the fire each morning. Rowan hunted or fished. They read books together in the evenings, mostly old paperbacks from his modest shelf. He showed her how to carve spoons from soft wood, how to make a snare, how to mark her path with stones so she never lost her way again. One afternoon, she laughed when she managed to set a snare that actually caught a squirrel. Rowan insisted they let it go. "I'm not that hungry," he teased. Each small victory made her feel more in control, less like a victim, more like a survivor. The forest, once so menacing, now breathed with her, and she with it. She was still afraid sometimes. She still woke in the night from dreams of being left behind. But she no longer felt powerless. And that changed everything. Rowan had known for weeks that this moment would come. Maya was growing stronger, both in spirit and in body, but the time was drawing near when the forest would no longer be enough. Her belly was round now, her movements slower, her breaths deeper. The birth wasn't far off, and though Rowan had learned enough about first aid and trauma care to keep someone alive, childbirth was a different matter entirely. So, one cold morning, after Maya had fallen asleep reading by the hearth, Rowan climbed the ridge just beyond the western clearing and turned on the old two-way radio he'd buried years ago under a false tree stump. It took a few minutes to warm up, crackling with static and faded memories. Then he turned the dial to channel 9. He didn't say much. Just enough to trigger the memory of the person on the other end. "This is Rowan Kane. I need a favor." Quietly. The woman who answered was named Clara, a retired midwife who had delivered babies in these mountains for 40 years. She knew Rowan from the early days of his retreat from the world, back when he still sometimes came into town for supplies. They had spoken only a handful of times, but he'd once helped repair her roof during a storm, and that small act had lingered in her heart. When Clara arrived the next day, she wore plain clothes and brought nothing but a single black bag. No questions. No phone. No judgment. Maya was nervous at first, unsure if this was another trick or test. But Clara's warm eyes and gentle hands melted her defenses. She examined Maya with care, whispered encouraging words, and finally said, "You're strong, sweetheart. You've done more than most already." Later, Clara pulled Rowan aside on the porch. "She needs to deliver in a hospital. Not just because she's far along, but because the world needs to know what was done to her." Rowan said nothing. His jaw tightened. Clara nodded slowly, reading his silence. "Let me make a call. Discreet. To people who care." Within 48 hours, a women's protection agency was notified. Clara made sure it was someone trustworthy, someone with experience dealing with domestic abuse and criminal neglect. They sent a coordinator to a nearby town who waited until nightfall before driving up the mountain in an unmarked SUV. Maya was reluctant to leave at first. The cabin had become her sanctuary, her proof that kindness could still exist. But Rowan reassured her. "You're not going alone," he said, handing her the necklace she'd dropped on the first day he found her. "You're going forward." Wrapped in a wool shawl, she stepped into the vehicle with quiet strength, eyes forward. By the next day, headlines began to spread in the local news. Pregnant woman found in forest, survivor of attempted abandonment. At the hospital, Maya was placed under police protection. Her vitals were stable, the baby healthy. When doctors ran blood tests, they found lingering traces of a sedative evidence that supported her claim of being drugged. Photos were taken of her injuries, records collected. And when detectives visited her in her hospital room, she didn't flinch. She told them everything. Names. Places. Conversations. She even described the exact taste of the tea her sister-in-law had given her before she lost consciousness. Back at her in-laws' home, the truth was harder to hide. Armin and his parents were questioned separately. Their stories didn't match. One neighbor came forward and said they hadn't seen Maya in weeks. Another recalled how the family had offhandedly said Maya had run off. But most damning of all was what Clara had predicted. Maya's medical reports and her quiet bravery were enough to open a formal investigation. Armin was arrested 2 days later for conspiracy and attempted murder. His parents followed. Bail was denied. And for the first time in months, Maya slept without fear. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. Armin and his parents stood frozen, the weight of the sentence sinking into their skin like cold rain. The charges, attempted murder, conspiracy, and endangering the life of a pregnant woman, were impossible to deny. Maya's blood tests, psychological evaluations, and consistent testimony had built a case so clear that even the most skeptical observers had little room for doubt. What broke the case open, beyond the medical evidence, were the small details Maya remembered: the make of the thermos used for the drugged tea, the model of the car, the exact brand of sleeping pills Armin had once left out by mistake. Every memory, though painful, was a thread in the noose they'd tied around their own guilt. Justice, for once, didn't stall. They were taken away in silence. Maya didn't watch them go. She was already holding something far more powerful in her arms. Zion. Her son came into the world 2 weeks after the trial, crying loudly as if declaring his place in it. He was perfect, tiny fists, dark curls, and wide, searching eyes. Maya named him Zion, meaning grace, because his very existence felt like a sacred kind of redemption. The hospital staff wept with her. Not out of pity, but from awe. She had survived. And now, she was starting anew. With help from a women's foundation, Maya was provided with temporary housing, modest but safe, and regular trauma counseling. A legal advocate helped her apply for long-term custody protections and restraining orders. Every step she took away from her past felt like bricks placed steadily beneath her feet. As for Rowan, he was cleared of any suspicion almost immediately. The hospital had informed the authorities of his role, and Maya's testimony had confirmed he had done nothing but care for her, protect her, and respect her boundaries. Still, journalists were eager to find him, the forest hero, as one headline dubbed him. But Rowan refused interviews. He didn't want applause or credit. He went back to his cabin. It was on a quiet spring morning that he found the envelope. There, resting on a flat stone at the edge of his porch, sealed with a pressed violet, was a letter. He opened it and read, "You didn't save me, Rowan. You saw me. When the world closed its eyes, you looked. And in doing that, you gave me the strength to save myself. Thank you. Maya." He folded the letter, heart full but quiet. No need to reply. She was already free. The forest looked different now. It was late spring, bright green leaves shimmered in the sunlight, and wildflowers dotted the trail's edge like tiny flames of color. A soft breeze moved through the trees, rustling their branches gently, like an old friend whispering welcome. Maya stood at the threshold of the woods, Zion cradled peacefully in her arms. He was wrapped in a pale blue blanket, his tiny hands curled against her chest. She took a deep breath, the scent of pine and moss grounding her, filling her lungs with calm. The same trees that once loomed like sentinels of fear now stood as witnesses to her strength. She didn't walk far. She didn't need to. From the shadows ahead, Rowan stepped quietly into view. His presence hadn't changed, solid, steady, grounded like the earth itself. His hair was longer, touched with more gray, but his eyes held the same stillness. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Rowan simply nodded in greeting, and Maya returned the gesture with a small, serene smile. She stepped forward just enough so he could see Zion's face. The baby stirred slightly, then settled again, sensing no danger here, only peace. "This is where you were saved," Maya whispered gently into her son's ear, pressing her lips to his temple. "This is where we began again." She looked once more at Rowan, and he gave the slightest nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey, the pain, the survival. Then Maya turned back, retracing her steps with her child safe in her arms, her heart steady. The forest closed behind her, not like a trap this time, but like a door that knew it could be opened again, whenever she chose. She had been abandoned once, but never again.